Okay, welcome to the class. This is the Pass the Test class on today's topic is going to be your fiduciary duties in the agency section for the test. Now, fiduciary duties in the terms of the agency section of the National Real Estate Exam Test is going to be very important. There's going to be a lot of questions that come out of that area. And so, what are your fiduciary duties? All right. So, what creates your fiduciary duty? Your fiduciary duty is created when you enter into an agreement or contract to provide services to a buyer or to a seller, and it's outlined in an express contract. And an express contract is a written contract. You will have fiduciary duties in terms of an oil contract or an applied type of situation, but I'm focusing on express contracts, mainly written listing agreements like an exclusive right to sell or exclusive agency listing, those types of listing agreements. Typically, when you say fiduciary duties, it's interchangeable. And remember this, when you say fiduciary duty, you know you have a client and a principal, and you owe that client or that principal a set of duties because you're being hired to do something based on your expertise. And this in this instance is to sell a house or to find a buyer a house. And so those duties are very, very important. And so that's what we're going to go over. We're going to actually look at some questions and how they're going to ask you about your different fiduciary duties and the multiple ways that they ask you. And a lot of this stuff is just really knowing the definition. Now, there's a couple of fiduciary duties that appear to be more important than others. And people always like say, well, what exactly are you as a fiduciary? I tell people to treat that person the same way as you would want to be treated. Treat them like they're you. Right? If you would want to know something, then you disclose it to them. And if you want somebody to remain loyal to you and not be doing backdoor dealings and things like that, you forward that to your client, your principal, and those set of duties should be taken serious because you're being hired to perform a very, very important task for the seller or for the buyer. So, what are your fiduciary duties? And there's 6 of them, and you typically use the acronym OCAR: obedience, loyalty, disclosure, confidentiality, accounting, and reasonable care. All right, so let's look at the first one. And I'm going to show you some questions that's related to each one of these duties or how they would ask them. And I'm going to first bring up a sheet that I created. And let me bring that sheet up so you can kind of see what those some of those questions are. Give me one second. So when you're talking about the fiduciary duties, and this is what I typed out, and I'm going to share this here for you. We are. Sorry, it's taking me a little bit of time, but here it is. All right, let's share this and take a look at this document and how I want you to see this here. Okay, so down here, I kind of created an outline for y'all with this agency. This is how I would learn agency, but let's look specifically at your fiduciary duties here. All right, obedience, that's the O in old car. All right. Um, you have to follow your legal instructions, the legal instructions of your principal. And they have to be legal. You don't have to violate the law. I mean, you have a duty of obedience. That's a very, very important fiduciary duty that you owe your client. If they tell you to do something that's legal, then you got to do it on behalf of them. That's not too hard. Just be obedient, listen to their lawful instructions, and you'll get a question on the test about obedience. And I'm going to show you one once we go through each one of these. Loyalty means what I want you to know what loyalty means. It pretty much means that you're not doing backdoor dealings or you're not doing side deals or you're not being dishonest to your client. And that's a very, very important fiduciary duty. So know obedience, know what the loyalty means. The only thing you need to really know is probably what I tell people to do is know the definition of what obedience means of your fiduciary duties and just give a couple of examples of how you can be obedient. you can just, Google, like, what is obedience and fiduciary duties, and just Google it, and it'll give you a couple of examples of what they mean by the obedience. And the same thing with loyalty. The one really is a couple really big ones that you really got to pay close attention to. And the disclosure portion of the old car is probably one of the more important ones. So what does disclosure require you to do? It deals with your disclosures and your activities in regards to the seller and what the seller's disclosing. And if you know something that would the seller needs to know, you need to disclose that. You also, the main thing that they're going to try to test you on is conflicts of interest and self-dealings with disclosure. Say, for instance, you have an interest in something, or you need to you may like the property or want the property. You're dealing with a buyer in this instance probably, and there's a conflict of interest or something that you should be telling your client that you're not telling. And sometimes people ask me, well, how do I know when I need to disclose something? If you have to ask yourself, if should I disclose it. All right. But disclosure is very important because you need to disclose any conflicts of interest. You need to disclose if you have any interest in a property that perhaps a buyer is wanting to buy. Self-dealings, if you're going to maybe purchase the property from the seller and then sell it for a higher price, you need to let the seller know that. And you need to disclose any of those inappropriate actions. All other offers to purchase, you have to, what that means is you have, like, if you get an offer to purchase the property and you think that it's too low, you still have to give it to the seller. So you have to disclose all offers to purchase the property. That's going to be one of the questions on the test. Definitely conflicts of interest is going to be on a test. The true value that also goes to reasonable care, but you have the duty to disclose the true value of the property and be competent enough to come up with what the true value of the property is. Okay. And so that's not something that I would really worry about for the test, but I'm just going over what disclosure means for the test. I haven't really seen a whole lot of questions in regards to an agent being incompetent, not really being able to come up with disclosure, or a purchase price for the property. The true value goes to also reasonable care and just being competent enough to be able to come up with a true value of the property. Where it could become an interest in terms of disclosure is if you know that it's worth more and you're not telling your client that it's not worth more. That's more of what they're talking about in disclosure in this context of the materials. The next one is going to go with the property. Now, remember, you had a duty to disclose to the seller, but this one is about to the property, and most of the time it's to the public. All right. Material defects. So let me give you an example. If you walk into a property, I'm actually dealing with a property like this, and I see the seller. He's not in the state, so he's out of the state, and he didn't know if the property has issues. But I walked through it, and I took pictures of the property, and I saw something. I told him about it, and I told him to protect him because he needs to disclose that defect to other people. Material defects with the property or with the title or anything that would affect the ownership of the property needs to be disclosed, even if the seller doesn't know about it and you know about it. You have to disclose material defects with the property, anything with the title, anything that is just a issue or something that would change someone's mind if they knew. That's kind of what you need to think about in terms of disclosure. I'm going to disclose anything that would change someone's mind if they knew, or I want to give them an opportunity to at least know about it. And perhaps if they want to, you know, go and do further research or do more diligence, you're giving them the opportunity to do so. Um, Disclosure of commission. You want to disclose commission, any splitting arrangements with commission, any arrangements that's been made with commission, and where's the monies that I'm going to pay you going to go, and if you need to go over that type of stuff. That's disclosure. And then Megan's Law, that people actually, do you have to disclose Megan's Law or stigmatized property? Um, with Megan's Law, there's no requirement by law to disclose Megan's Law because it's just public information. So, if there's some sexual offender or something in the neighborhood, that should be public information, and that's going to be the diligence of the buyer to discover those things. Um, that's something I tell people to ask their broker how they want to handle that, and how they want to handle certain disclosures, because some brokers are more comfortable with dealing with those types of disclosures than others. But by law, you don't have to disclose Megan's Law because a lot of that stuff is public information. Now, I will say with like a stigmatized property, if something like stigmatized is like death occurred in the property or suicide occurred in the property, what I say is, I always err on the side of caution and I just disclose. Uh, but I've seen instances where people, there was some type of event happened in the property where someone either got killed in the property or murdered in the property or suicide took place in the property and it wasn't disclosed, and then they were in trouble or got litigation filed against them because the other side felt as though that they didn't disclose a material fact about the property. Again, those type of disclosures, you go over that with your broker and see how they want to handle it in terms of their brokerage and how their model is set up for handling that. But the duty of disclosure is very, very, very important, and you'll get a lot of questions from that. So know more than just the definition of disclosure. Know all some of these ones here that I outlined here. Confidentiality, that's simple. Know what to keep confidential and never share clients' info that's confidential. That's pretty straightforward. All right. Don't go and tell somebody that the seller will accept less than what the listing price is. All right, unless you got authorization to do that. Don't go telling the seller's information, telephone number, or email addresses and things like that that's confidential to people that say they can provide a service to your seller or your client. Keep their information confidential and proprietary. Never share their information. And this is during a transaction, after, and while you're involved in the transaction, and even after it. If it should be kept confidential, it should be kept confidential. The only time that you're forced to not keep stuff confidential on behalf of your client is if you're ordered to by law. All right. If they get into some litigation and you have to provide the courts with some legal information, or not with some information because you've been subpoenaed or something like that, you have to give the courts that information. And then the last one that I'm going to talk about is accounting. All right. This is the last fiduciary duty. Personal property that belongs to the client. You want to account for that type of stuff. And I just put this out down as an example. If you're selling a person's house, you want to make sure that they know, or that you know what they want to include in the sale or not. So you got to account for their personal property in the transaction. Make sure you separate the stuff in the chattel and the personal property that they want to keep, because if you don't make it clear to a buyer that that's not, the seller didn't want to include that in the purchase, then you may get over a dispute over something that could have easily been avoided. Accounting also means separating monies, when you're dealing with a trust account, co-mingling and things like that. You don't co-mingle funds in trust accounts. You want to have a dedicated trust account that's established by your broker to handle any funds for escrow or any earnest money like funds or anything like that. That should go immediately to your broker, and it should go, and it shouldn't be commingled with any other type of money. And commingling means mixing the funds. All right, personal funds with funds of a client. So those are your fiduciary duties broken down. You need to know every last one of them. Some just the definitions of, like obedience, definition only, loyalty, definition only. Maybe come up with a couple examples of what obedience and loyalty is. Confidentiality, that's very simple, cut and dry. Keep people's stuff a secret or private. And then you got accounting. Okay. And so those are your fiduciary duties. There's another one down here, which is going to be reasonable care and skill. And that's just the minimum standards of competency. All right. Reasonable care and skill. Know what you're doing and be competent in what you're doing. All right. You should have a certain level of expertise, and it should be similar to your peers and other people that are providing services for people. So these fiduciary duties, some of them you need to just know the definition and some examples. Some of them you need to know a little bit more. Definitely know a little bit more about disclosure, and definitely know a little bit more about what the accounting standards are, like handling and maintaining documents, providing copies timely, and stuff like that. So some fiduciary duties are a bit more important than others, but more importantly, some fiduciary duties you need to know more about for the test. Let's take a look at some of the questions on the test, that you may run into in regards to fiduciary duties. Give me 1 second. Let me get the document up here. All right. see my email. I don't mind that, but all right. So here's some questions about your fiduciary duties. And what I did for the class again is I just went and read as many practice tests as I could, and I came up with some of these ways that they're going to ask you about your fiduciary duties. So, like, here's the first question, and you should be able to actually answer these without the multiple choice questions. The fiduciary duty of accounting requires an agent too. What a fiduciary duty of accounting? We went over that. This is one of those ones that have multiple requirements to know. It's about five main things that you need to know about accounting. You know, providing copies, not mixing money and handling the money and trust accounts appropriately. All right. Handling your client's money and escrow accounts versus trust accounts and things like that. So know your duty of accounting. That's how they ask that. Now, here's another question about accounting asked a different way. What is the requirement of an agent under the fiduciary duty of accounting? What that pretty much tells me is I need to know what the fiduciary duty of accounting is. Okay, here's just a general definition for fiduciary duty of obedience. It's a straightforward question. You have to get these questions right on the test. These questions right here, you have to get these right because these are just the straight basic definition questions. So the question would be asked, excuse me, an agent's fiduciary duty of obedience obligates them to. I don't need to see multiple choice questions because this was came from a multiple choice question. I just didn't put the A, B, C, or D down here, but you shouldn't need a multiple choice question when you're getting ready to go take the test. If you still need choices to figure out what that is in terms of obedience, you don't go take the test. You just need to know the definition of obedience, give a basic idea, just know a basic idea of what obedience means and obeying your principles, lawful orders. That's what I remember obedience as. I don't have to violate the law and when it comes to the obedience. If the order is lawful and it's associated with the property and your duties and the services that you said you were going to provide, you have to obey their lawful instructions. All right. Here's one here. What is the primary obligation of an agent owed to their client? All right. They're probably looking for like loyalty or disclosure, but this is a multiple choice question where they're asking you the primary obligation. So what I would do with this question is I would just type, what is the primary obligation that an agent owes to their client? I would Google that and I would study it and maybe perhaps write down a little short explanation of what that means. Here's one about loyalty. Explain the agent's duty of loyalty to their principal. Know these are all different ways, and these will have multiple choice questions to them, but you don't need to know those multiple choice questions. You should be able to, before you go take the test, if I ask you, explain the agent's duty of loyalty to the principal. What does that mean? No backdoor dealings. Disclose if you know that the property value is too low, you want to tell them that. You owe them these duties as their fiduciary. Well, here's number six. What fiduciary duty requires an agent's obligation to perform tasks with competence and skill expected from a real estate professional? That's reasonable care. That's a way that they're going to ask you about that. All right. Here's another way that they're going to ask you about obedience. Explain the fiduciary duty of obedience in a real estate relationship. All right. Which duty requires an agent to act in the best interest of their principal? All right. We need to know these things. And then what all you got to do is be able to go down the different duties. Oh, obedience. Is that obedience that we're requiring me to ask them out? No, that's not obedience. Okay, what's the next one? Okay, loyalty. Okay, loyalty, I'm gonna put that on the short list. That might be one. Disclosure. Is disclosure requiring me to act in the best interest of and so you just go down the list of the fiduciary duties and find which one fits best with that question. Also, more importantly, there's going to be four questions. So if you can answer them without four answers, if you can answer without the answers, you should be able to really get it if you see four answers. So that's why I put them like this. I don't put the answers here because at some point you shouldn't even need to see the answers to be able to answer these questions. The definition of fiduciary duty in the context of real estate relationship. What does that mean to you? Know what fiduciary duty is. What does that mean? What are you doing for someone? A couple more. An agent knows their client is willing to pay more than the listed price, so you're dealing with a buyer for the property. How should an agent handle this information when negotiating to the seller? This goes to disclosure. You need in confidentiality. You shouldn't go and tell that listing agent that your client will be willing to pay more. So this is more of not, this is not necessarily going to be a definition question. These are going to be four answers that won't be definitions. So these are all the different ways that you're going to see this stuff coming at you. And I just wanted to list a couple. And it's a lot of fiduciary duty questions. There's many more that I could have put on here. So definitely know your fiduciary duties. The last one that I wanted to cover, what is the potential consequence of a real estate agent breaching their fiduciary duties? Know what happens to you if you breach your fiduciary duties, right? Where you said you were going to do something and you didn't do it. All right, that's serious business. No, no, and that's probably going to be more on for the state test because again, agency is guided by the state. But this question, just know what the consequences are if you breach your fiduciary duty. Now, this video went way longer, but that tells you how important fiduciary duties is for the test. So when you're dealing with these questions, here are some of the ways that they ask you, and for the most part, if you know the definition and can give a couple of examples of the definition of the duty you're speaking of, you should be okay for the test. So when I'm studying these, I'm going to know the definition, and then I'm going to know a couple of examples of what obedience is, what loyalty is, of what disclosure is. And I put some of them on the sheet that I just went over with you. But thank you for joining me for this video. Hopefully it was helpful and assist you in passing the test. Good luck.